Well, thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Abbott Chambers, the city librarian here for the Sausalito Public Library. This is our fifth in our series of Sausalito People events. Before I introduce Maria, let me tell you about our last program coming up a week from today, also at 7:30, so that's May 3rd. We have two children's book authors, Amy Noveski and Bethany Murguia. They both live in Sausalito's Spring Street neighborhood. Bethany is the author of Buglet, Zoe Gets Ready, and her forthcoming book, I Feel 5. We're pretty excited about that one. And Amy is the author of Elephant Prince, Georgia in Hawaii, and the forthcoming Mr. and Lady Day. So now on to tonight's speaker. Maria Finn is the author of a memoir, Hold Me Tight and Tango Me Home, a book on edible gardening called A Little Piece of Earth, and most recently, The Whole Fish, How Adventurous Eating Will Improve Your Sex Life and Help Save the Ocean. She also compiled and edited two anthologies, Mexico in Mind and Cuba in Mind. Shorter pieces by Maria have appeared in Sunset Magazine, Audubon, Saveur, Gastronomica, The New York Times, Wine Spectator, and many other publications. Maria is currently working on her first novel. The book is based on the period of her life after college, when she spent her summers working on a predominantly female commercial fishing boat in Alaska, and her winters traveling and working in Latin America. Maria holds a Master of Fine Arts degree in creative writing from Sarah Lawrence College. In addition to writing books and freelancing, she currently teaches feature writing at Stanford University. Maria has been a Sausalito resident for 5 years. Unsurprisingly, given her work about fishing in the ocean, she lives on a houseboat. Please join me in welcoming Maria Finn.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks so much for coming tonight. Lou, if you have trouble hearing anything, just put your hand up, and I'll talk louder. Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks. And so you can hear. You cannot? Is my microphone on? Is that better? Okay. I'll try to speak louder or loudly. So I'm just going to start off telling you a little bit well, first I want to thank you guys for coming tonight. I know it's a Friday night. Here we are at a public library. that makes us kind of not very cool. I feel so lucky to live in Sausalito and be a part of this community. I arrived about 5 years ago from New York City, and I think, I tell people, it was like leaving an abusive marriage or something. Like, I had post-traumatic stress disorder my first month in Sausalito. And I went out, and I was living on the houseboats, and I went outside and asked my neighbor, I said, does this ever go away, this feeling of being the luckiest person in the world? And she's like, no, I've been here 30 years, and it never goes away. So I'm just super excited to be here, and very excited to be in a library, actually. I grew up going to libraries. I spent most of my time in the library. It's really why I became a writer. And so it feels really good to be here, except for our Kansas City library. We used to have these gerbils that had a lot of babies, and then they ate their babies. And then the librarian would have to try to explain to us in these awkward conversations what was going on. So I'm super glad there's no gerbils here. you guys just have a great magazine selection instead. So that's great. But so I went to college in Kansas City, and I got a degree in English, and I was working as a waitress. And I wanted to travel around the world, and I wanted to be a writer. But I could never save any money, because, when you're a waitress, you come home with cash, and then it just goes. So I got this idea that I was going to go work in Alaska, make a bunch of money, so I could travel around the world. And I didn't really think this idea through very well, but one of my older brothers had worked in Alaska. And so I bought my plane ticket, I was going to go, and my older brother said, well, you're not going to last 2 weeks in Alaska. And we're pretty competitive, so I knew I was going to die before I was going to fail up there. That was my plan. And my plan was to work in canneries. I thought, no problem, I'll work in a cannery, because everybody's read those Make $30,000 in One Summer in Alaska, right? Okay, canneries pay $6 an hour. So do the math there. You're not getting rich quick. So I bought a plane ticket to Alaska. I arrived, I got on a bus. The bus stopped in Homer, Alaska, so I got off, end of the road, no further you could go. And I went into the canneries, and they said, well, nobody's fishing yet. There's no fish. There's no jobs. And I think I had $150 in my pocket, and I didn't know anybody. and I had no credit cards. I think somebody gave me a credit card once in undergraduate, and that never happened again. I kind of abused that situation. So I didn't get another one for a very long time. So my money quickly ran out. I was down to $20, and I was just like, oh no, there's no jobs. There's tons of people scrambling for jobs, and I was sitting in the harbor, and this man came up, and he's a short guy and missing a finger and a tooth and a sailor cap on, and he said, you want to go on a boat ride, fish for halibut? He said, I got a couple women down there from Sweden. I take guys out for money illegally. I take women out for fun. You just go out and get a halibut for dinner. Well, all right. So we go on this little boat, the Sea Note. We go across the bay. We're fishing for a halibut, and the boat dies. And so while the boat's broken down, he's kind of trying to fix it. He starts telling us how he's actually the oldest bastard son of Errol Flynn, that he found this out. The police told him this, and he was so excited to find out who he actually was. But so I'm stranded on a boat, $20 left in my pocket with the oldest bastard son of Errol Flynn. And he's like, oh, none of us have any money for a tow back to town. So we're just sitting out there. But there's this wilderness lodge right there. And so the wilderness lodge charges, at that time, it was a long time ago, 20 years ago or more, $2,000 a week for integration with wilderness. And so he got his little skiff out, and he rowed in, and I had an orange juice can, and I bailed it while he rowed. And we go in there, and the owner comes down, and he says, can I help you? And Kenny says, yeah, can you give us a tow back to town? Is anybody going back to town? You can tow us back to town. He said, no, we don't have any boats going to town. So we're just standing there on the beach, and all these people are outside on the deck drinking wine. They have their glass of wine. And Kenny yells up to him and says, hey, whereabouts y'all from? And one of them said, Malibu. Kenny said, oh, well, I've got people in Malibu. My dad's the oldest bastard son of Errol Flynn. And so I'm just standing there. I don't know anybody. I'm just like, shrugged. So a few minutes later, they send somebody down, a young guy down. He says, I'll give you guys a tow back to town, and I'll take you back in about 20 minutes. And so we're rowing back out, and Kenny says, you know, I hate to use my dad's name like that, but those people wouldn't have helped us otherwise. And right, yeah. So I realized, I was like, Alaska's this place you can completely reinvent yourself. And I also realized I now had boat and fishing experience. I wouldn't give any details, but when you're pounding the docks looking for work, it's like, okay, they want to know if you have boat experience. So we get back to the docks, and I'm like, yeah, I've got boat experience. Didn't get seasick. We fished, you know. I didn't say much else. And so I got a job on a seine boat. So seining, this is just a little video that'll show you. So seining, you have a big boat and you have a skiff. You can kind of see it out here. And then you have the net, sort of the web in between. You have a lead line that sinks and a cork line that floats. So the white's your cork line, there's your web, and you'll have a lead line in there too. So the first skipper I worked for was kind of a nefarious character who told me, can I turn this down a second? So he said, well, we already have a full crew, but if you come on the boat and stack the web, then we'll pitch in a little money. I'll throw in $1,000, other deckhands will throw in $500, so you'll make some money. I thought, well, $2,000 for the summer, $2,500, that's okay, you know? So I go out there, and I'm going to show you a quick picture of how I started off fishing. So when you're fishing, sorry. Not that. Here we go. So this is what happens after a while when you're on fishing boats, right? You don't want to look good because you're out there with a bunch of guys. And so you're thinking, you're wearing overalls like that covered in fish slime and guts, right? But they still manage to figure out there's a woman under all that. So I'd be out on the boat with this guy and kind of climbing around through the pink salmon, and he'd be looking down and be like, are you wearing a bra today? And you're going, are you kidding me? And so it became kind of clear that unless that I slept with him, I wasn't getting any money that summer. And I thought, well, you know, if you're going to go be a hooker in Alaska, you'd make a lot more than $2,500, right? So I was like, okay. And the other deckhands on the boat were great. There's two guys right out of college, and then the other guy, Ron, was a barber from Wisconsin, and the permit was in his name. He couldn't care less about fishing. And he brought all these photographs of his schnauzer that he pinned up around the cabin, and he brought some cheese curds for a rainy day, and then he brought a cassette of Meryl Streep reading The Velveteen Rabbit, and he listened to it every night in his bunk, and every night he cried when the rabbit became real. And we're like, Ron, you listen to this every night. Like, how do you get so upset But so they were great, and they were getting angry at what the skipper was doing to me. But this was their income for the year, so I was like, I got to get off the boat. So I got off the boat in Valdez, still had 20 bucks in my pocket. Tried to find a boat job, couldn't find one. So I went to work in a cannery. And so the cannery, I got a job. I was told I was really lucky because I was not on the slime line. I stacked salmon in neat rows onto a giant metal tray. I put them in a freezer. And then after I did this several times, I took frozen salmon out of a freezer and threw them in, they were just frozen solid, into a big bin. And there's heavy metal music playing, and it was sort of freezing cold water. And it was also, there was nowhere to stay. I didn't have a tent. This place, Valdez, is a rainforest. So this guy in the cannery was like, big guy in coveralls. He's like, so where are you staying? I said, I don't know. He said, well, I got a black van back there you can stay in with me. And I was like, all right, I got to get out of here. So, so they called coffee break, or mug up is what they call it in Alaska. So I threw my gloves down the chute, grabbed my backpack, went out to the road. And I'm hitchhiking back to Homer, and an RV pulls up. It's been totally gutted. And this family, says, get in. So I get in, and they're from the native village of Holy Cross. And they were all sitting on like lawn chairs, and everybody had a giant ashtray kind of wedged between their feet. They gave me a beer, and they gave me a cigarette. We're driving around, and the woman said to me, she said, I once married a military man, and he came and lived in the village. She said in one winter he had a dream about chickens. And I told the elders about the dream. He told the elders. So the elders gave him the name, He Who Fucks Chickens. And she said he left. He left that next spring. I don't know why. And she goes, but I'm married to a native guy now. So they drop me off in Homer, and thank God there's tons of daylight too. And I go, okay, so I get dropped off in Homer. I'm down back in the boat harbor. I still have 20 bucks. And somebody says, there's a young woman here looking for deckhands. She wants a female deckhand who has boat experience. And so I met her at Don Jose's Mexican restaurant. I think I spent my only 20 bucks on margaritas. And she said, have you fished? I said, yeah. She said, do you get seasick? I said, no. And she said, who do you work for? And I said, Kevin D., the guy I work for in Prince William Sound. She said, what do you think of him? And I said, well, I think he's a chump. And she said, he is a chump. You're hired. So, so that's when the story starts. And so I went and I worked for, and Christy was about 27 years old, and she started running a boat. And her two brothers were some of the best fishermen in Alaska. And Christy was kind of always trying to compete with them. And we had sort of these just kind of incredible adventures, because when you're working with men and you're a woman, you're oftentimes cooking, right, in the galley or something. But when you're with all women, you have to go down and you have to drop the anchor. You have to try to fix stuff, or you have to do whatever comes up. And so this is sort of what an opener looks like. This is herring. But this is what a salmon, because everybody's going after the same fish, right? So it was interesting being with all women, because what would happen is there's 3 different ways the men responded to us. Some would cheer us on and would help us and were super happy for us. Some of them would deny we were actually doing it, and some of them were dangerous and would try to hurt us. And so we've got sort of a hit coming up here. So our first opener on our boat, we got T-boned, which is like a broadside hit. There it goes. There it goes. But that was just a bow-to-bow hit. But it gets very exciting and testosterone out there. Another thing that happens is we have some problems sometimes on boats. So we were fishing Kamishak, you can see back there. And it was kind of my fault. The line went under the boat, got wrapped in the prop and around the shaft. And so I had to dive under the boat and try to cut the line out. And all we have are these little Victorinox knives. So I had on this kind of wetsuit, long underwear getup, and no weights or no oxygen. So I dove under the boat. And my back was kind of up against the boat, and it's moving in the waves, and it's no visibility. I see these like dark shadows going by underneath me. And I had a line around my waist and a line coming out of the shaft and the prop. And you're looking at all these lines dangling in the water, and I just was like, oh, this could go really bad really easily here. And so it didn't. It went fine ultimately. I was just really cold. But in the novel, writing a novel, the great thing is you can take that and you can make it very dramatic. So all these things that happened that were pretty dramatic, I can kind of ratchet those up quite a bit in a novel, right? And so we had another one where the skipper and I were taking the boat around Gore Point. And so Gore Point was always a problem, And anybody here work on boats? I know John Foss does. I know Dave Johnson has. Anybody else a boat person? Because what happens on a boat is everything goes wrong in bad weather. Usually the boat's fine in good weather. It's bad weather. And so we were going around Gore Point. Weather always blows up. We had bad gas. So the bad gas or bad diesel actually, so it kept choking the engine off and killing it. Well, if you're in waves and you have no power, you can't keep your bow into the wave. But if you go sideways, you'll roll and you'll die. So we had to take turns just changing the fuel filter. You know, you're going bouncing up and down, and you're kind of sick from it, and the other person's trying to keep the bow in the waves. So that was kind of a scary hour or two, right? And but in the novel, I can turn it into this everybody almost dying, and sort of and again turn into this like big epiphany, sort of terrifying moment. So that's kind of why it's fun to do this as a novel as opposed to a memoir. Then, after about 3 years of fishing commercially, the thing was, I work for a female skipper, and you hear about female skippers, but there's not many in the state, and not many boats hire women. So it kind of came down to this. I either had to get my own boat and run it, or I had to do something else. And getting your own boat and running it, it's a lot. It's a lot of money. It's just a lot I would have had to learn. And I wanted to be a writer still. So I applied to graduate school, and I started working for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And I monitored salmon runs out in western Alaska. This is Togiak. And we're probably 60 miles from Togiak Village, which is a teeny tiny village. And it's just, that's what it's, I don't know how, everything in Alaska is bigger than the state of Rhode Island. So it's like, you know, every national park is bigger than the state of Rhode Island, every glacier. So I don't know how big Togiak National Wildlife Refuge is. But you're out there in just pure wilderness. And sometimes it's terrifying. And then other times it's like, kind of like, I don't know, like your soul gets pulled out of your body and is reflected back to you from everything that's around you. And it's like this amazing state of grace. And so that's also what drives me a lot when I'm trying to write about Alaska is trying to sort of create a little bit of that. And it's very difficult. It's very, very, very difficult with writing. But it really is something that wilderness up there was exhilarating. And I don't live there anymore. I now just like going out to Tennessee Valley. But because sometimes, like Togiak, I had one summer up there, it rained sideways for 5 weeks in a row. Yeah, every day for 5 weeks. You know, it's just the weather is brutal in Alaska. It's incredibly beautiful, and the reason it stays that way is because the weather is so terrible. And so I did Fish and Game for about 5 years, and then went to New York for graduate school, and I will come back to a few things. So for the novel, I've been working on it for a while, and it's gone through some different changes, but let's see, I'm just going to read you some bits and pieces. I had sidebars throughout it, so it had kind of recipes and like kind of little facts about the ocean and different things, and then my agent and my editor both keep telling me I have to take them out. But some of them I really like. So I have one on female pirates I'm just going to read because I really like the female pirate one. So this female pirate is from Ireland, and her name is Grain O'Malley. One of the most immortalized pirate queens is Grace O'Malley, born in 1530 in Connaught, Ireland. In her heyday, she commanded a fleet that numbered 20 ships. They reigned over Western Ireland's rocky coastline and pounced on English merchant ships bound for Galway. She called it maintenance. In the United States, there's Anne Bonny. Anne Bonny was a redhead born in Ireland but raised in South Carolina, and she thrived during the golden age of piracy. She took up with John Calico Jack Rackham, the notorious captain of the pirate ship Revenge. They terrorized the waters of the Caribbean until finally caught off guard one night by a government vessel. Anne Bonny and fellow pirate Mary Read fought fiercely alongside one other man while the others slept off their drink. Bonny's last words to her lover as he was dragged off to the gallows was, "Sorry to see you there, but if you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." Anne Bonny was pregnant at the time, and so she pled her belly and was spared hanging. In Newfoundland, there was Mary Lindsay Cobham. And faced with the bleak career choices of prostitute or maid, Mary Lindsay hooked up with a disgruntled fisherman, Eric Cobham, and they took to the sea. Pity the honest seaman who saw this black ship emerge from the fog. And while most mild-mannered Canadian pirates only killed a few of the captured and let the rest go, this couple slaughtered everyone and sunk the ships so there would be no witnesses, and the boats chalked up to lost at sea. Lore has it that she would use the captured sailors for target practice for her pistol. After the couple settled down and retired in southern France, their marriage fell apart. And in Sweden, there was Avila. In the 19th century, a Swedish king tried to marry off his daughter Avidilla, who fled from this arrangement by joining a crew of young women dressed in drag and destined for sea. There they came upon a ship of pirates, who, so impressed by Avilda, made her their leader, and they terrorized the Baltic Sea, preying on merchant ships. Finally, the Prince of Denmark gave chase and bested them in battle. He had been the man she was supposed to marry. Impressed by his hand-to-hand combat skills, she agreed and eventually became the Queen of Denmark. And finally, in China, there's Qing Si. She's also known as Madame Qing. She left her job at a floating brothel to marry the pirate Zheng Yi. She joined her husband marauding the coast of China from Macau to Canton. When her husband died, she took over, laying down a few pirate laws. If you stole from the pirate booty, you got your head cut off. If you raped a captive, you got your head cut off. If you had consensual sex, still off with the head. Randy Pirate was a looting pirate. She grew her fleet to over 2,000 ships. Due to her success at sea and reputation as the fiercest naval power in the land, the Chinese emperor, weary of trying to defeat her, offered her pardon and a portion of the imperial fleet to command. She later opened a casino and died a rich woman. So, I'm going to read a little bit from the novel, and I'm just going to jump around to different parts instead of reading the whole thing through. But this is from the prologue. Women are considered bad luck on a ship. And according to nautical lore, redheads bring a boat misfortune. But Jackie, a ginger, only hired females to crew her boat. She gave the explanation, "I like girl talk," which some fishermen found maddening, though they cannot pinpoint exactly why. She didn't believe herself or her crew to be bad luck, at least not to her boat. And as for the other fishermen, if their mere presence caused those guys to miss the fish, well then she figured, fuck them, more fish for us. But she did adhere to the maritime superstition that leaving on a Friday brought a ship bad luck. So she and her crew members had one last night to hit town before the fishery officially opened. All right, so this is before they're leaving. What port towns before a fishing opener happens tend to get there's a lot of drinking and sex and fighting and stuff taking place. So I'm just going to read a few scenes of our characters in the bar before they go out. So this one is about a character named Eve. She's a deckhand on the boat. The first salmon opener would be called the next morning at 6 a.m. Just past midnight, the fishermen would put to sea. And so a crowd gathered at the bar. Dollar bills covered the wooden beams like talisman, all with scribbling on them. Most of these unintelligible, but all have fishing stories behind them. The last dollar spent on shore before heading back out, or the first buck earned from a freshly cashed cruise share. In the back room, deckhands stood around a well-worn billiards table, clutching beers and stacking quarters along the side of it. Esmeralda and Eve's turn came up. Eve inhaled, trying to get a fresh breath despite the uneasy buzz of too much testosterone, concentrated in the small space that surrounded her. She picked out a medium light stick, let it hang in her hand for a moment to test the weight, and started chalking the tip. Her long blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail that looked like it might burst from the rubber band at any moment. She had tan, almost ruddy cheeks, and her light blue eyes gleamed in the smoky air. She had yet to use her prettiness to her advantage in life, and instead carried herself like a tomboy, a little defensive and tightly coiled. She rubbed the quarter for a split second, then crouched to slip it into the slot. As she stood up, she felt a gust of hot whiskey breath behind her and quickly turned to find a large man with pockmarked cheeks, almost covered by a scruffy beard, looking down at her. He wasn't much known around town, just that he had shown up from somewhere on the East Coast earlier that spring, and so everyone in port assumed he was on the run from trouble. But he knew boats and so got hired. He stood too close to her, almost pinning her against a pool table. "Hey, what are you doing here, pretty?" he said. "Looking for work?" "No," she said. He said, "Well, I got a job for a sweet piece like yourself." He pulled a wad of cash out of his pocket and began thumbing through it. His friends laughed from the corner. "Fuck you," she said. A few of the guys just chuckled at him. What did he say to me?" he roared. He lunged towards her and grabbed for her right breast. She jumped aside and he grazed her shoulder instead. Esmeralda caught the falling pool cue while Eve yelled, "Keep your nasty hands off of me." As she managed to knee him hard in the crotch, he leaned over to clutch himself with one hand and swiped at her with his other. She grabbed the back of his head with both of her hands and tried to slam his face into her knee. But he jerked his head and she hit his temple and he fell to his knees, clutching his head. As he started to stand, Esmeralda, grasping the pool cue with two hands, slammed it down on his back, and a cracking noise rang out. He reached out and grabbed Eve's ankle. She was fumbling with her knife, trying to get it out of the sheath, when Esmeralda, in swift motion, yanked his hair back and put her sizable knife to his throat. The room got quiet. Calmly, Esmeralda said, "Let go of her." He did, and Eve wound up to kick him in the ribs, but by this time, other people around the table had jumped in and grabbed her and subdued him. Eve, shaken with anger, yelled, "I said, fuck you." After a few moments passed, the guys who had been holding the man back let him go. One made the comment, "Stop fighting with the girls, Henry. They're going to hurt you." Let's see. Henry turned and glared at Eve and Esmeralda, his face burning red and hair disheveled. "I'll get you for that," he said. His milky gray eyes narrowed into a squint, and he left and then stumbled back to the harbor. Eve had already turned away from him to reclaim her place at the pool table, but her hands were shaking too hard to handle the balls. While some may experience the sensation as fear, for Eve it was adrenaline and anger. She rolled the pool cue between her palms to calm herself. Esmeralda leaned over and started racking the balls, her hands steady, her face revealing nothing. Then Eve chalked the tip, gripped the pool cue lightly. Her knuckles turned white. Okay, Esmeralda said, looking up for the table at Eve. Break them. Eve nodded, and a slight smile passed between them. So in the bar, Jackie's talking to her brother, who's a very good fisherman, trying to get him to help her out for the season, and he's saying he's not going to do it. And so this section is just about how she found her boat and started working on it. So Jackie had first found the Grand O'Malley, derelict in a Kodiak dry dock, listing on old wooden pallets. The vessel wasn't much to look at as to the casual passerby, but she'd been able to ignore its many shortcomings that included worn patches of paint on the hull and a decrepit interior. In much the way we choose to ignore the faults and failures of a first love, she only saw potential in this abandoned vessel. She located the owner, and it was in such disrepair he virtually gave it to her. Then she got busy. First dated a shipwright for carpentry work for the interior. He yanked out the old bunks that had been overtaken by robust colonies of mildew. She would bring him a thick ham sandwich for lunch as he tackled the shells that needed to be sanded and varnished. When he finished the job and she watched him once again tear into a ham sandwich and wipe his hand with the back of his hand, it became clear to her they had no real future, and she thanked him and explained that she had fallen for a mechanic. This new man helped her get the sputter out of the starter. Prior to meeting him, she had spotty luck with the hydraulics. She had to make a fist and pound to get any signs of life from them, but he spent a few days working on them and then got the lifts and booms to respond to the merest of caresses. Jackie ran the tips of her fingers over the button that fired up the hydraulic head for backhauling the net. She let her hand linger on it, feeling the hum of hydraulics vibrate. A slight shiver of pleasure ran up her spine. The marine diesel engine, once properly oiled and tuned up, purred like a drunk lion. But when his ship left for Dutch Harbor, she hugged him goodbye with her hips pulled back, hinged away from his. If there was anything in abundance in Alaska, it was men who could fix stuff. She entered into each relationship with the best of intentions, but somehow the attraction faded each time as the project drew to a close. Then, facing a morass of wires tangled up behind the electronics, she called up an electrician, but apparently he was happily married and wanted to charge her full price to work on them. Jackie tried to pick his brain and tried to finish it herself, binding them with electrical wire and then fastening those into place with duct tape. It worked, at least in port, and she figured they'd be fishing shallow and would only have to cover it if bad weather blew up. It was mostly seaworthy. Her boat was one of the smallest and oldest in the fleet, but by constantly working on it, a sort of symbiosis took place, and as she grew to know it, she started to feel fiercely protective of it. She named it Grand O'Malley after the Irish pirate queen. Gran was reputed to be promiscuous, fearless, and anti-romantic as she married for money, but passionate as she went to battle when her lover was killed, her son imprisoned. Jackie's Irish-American father had told her tales about Grand O'Malley. When she met the Queen of England, she refused to bow, explaining, "I'm also a queen." Her father used to tell her, an English queen is born to it, an Irish queen earns it. And Jackie was earning it. So this goes on a bit with there. So,
Your hair keeps blocking the mic.
oh,
Do you want to tie it?
sure. Okay. You guys heard that? My hair's blocking the mic. So a little wardrobe malfunction. And then my other character, Sally Ann, is having sex in a pickup truck. And I'm not going to read you the sex scene because Lou's in my yoga class. I have my neighbors here. My dad's here. Can't do it. But I'll read the very first paragraph. The cab of the truck faced the ocean, and each smack of the wave against the shore reminded Sally Ann that her boat would soon be headed out to sea. Clouds had gathered, and the wind reflected dull, gray broken by the foamy waves. Sally Ann sat on Bodin's lap, straddling him with her back to the sea, where the waves played out their sonorous rhythm. She felt, this seemed the best way to relieve herself of the conflicts of dread and excitement she felt for the coming months. Sex always reminded her of the ocean, or vice versa. She believed that the female orgasm is much like waves. Some pulse gently to the beach, never really breaking. Others sluiced upon the shore, foamy and effervescent. Some have a long, clear crest, and then there's the giant tidal wave that can change the course of the shoals and shore when the watery wall crashes down. More than a few women have been known to have their life altered by a giant rogue orgasm. There's a reason seafarers refer to the ocean as a she, and it's not just her temperament. All right, so now I'm going to just jump to the opener, and you saw a little bit of the opener, and I haven't read this much, so you can also give me feedback if it doesn't make sense, because it's sort of a technical type of fishing. And so, and like I said, we can pull, we can sort of, I think this is this one. Yeah. So you have the skiff, and so your skiff man is going to be in that small boat, and then you have the big boat, and they're going to pull that around kind of in an arc, and they'll hold it, usually a regular set's about 25 minutes, enough to let it build up, but not too long that the fish escape from the set. But the openers, especially the season opener, you have to figure nobody's been fishing for a while, so there's a big buildup. So not only are you trying to really get as many fish as you can, and there's most fish there, but you're also kind of establishing the pecking order for the season, right? So it's like, I'm sure there's equivalents in other industries, but it's sort of like you don't want to be the low man on the totem pole for the whole season. So the opener is sort of where you show that you're not going to be bullied, or you are going to be bullied. So I'm just going to read just a little bit from this. First opener. Salmon head for their birthplace with myopic purpose. The fish are pure muscle fighting against the mortal coil of the stream, their total instinct and force of nature. These salmon return to the place of their birth to spawn and die. Not the general area, but up the river, through the lake, to a stream. They find the nook and cranny in which they hatched into fry and some 3 or 4 years prior. This is sockeye salmon. After finding the spot, they breed, die, then their decomposing bodies provide fodder for their offspring to feed on the following spring. In front of these streams, the boats laid in wait until the Department of Fish and Game announcement came over the radio. Anybody who let their skiff go too soon would be fined and all their fish confiscated. About 50 seine boats towed their skiffs to the choppy gray water, vying for spots on Miners or Rocky Point, and in front of the streams in Dead Man's Karlik and Alugik Bay. The Alaska Range volcanoes on the other side of Chillicothe Straits, not fully visible in the weak light and morning mist, appeared as apparitions scalloped against the sky, their breaths slight tendrils of smoke floating above their ice-capped peaks. On the other side of the straits, the smooth slopes beamed in the summer light, and the emerald sheen that emanated from it suggested an electric current ran through the island. Jackie also felt a current run through her, excitement and fear mixed with anxiety, and the still unnamed emotion that made her right eye twitch. She knew she couldn't control it and had on her reflective sunglasses to see the fish, and so tried to ignore it. A lot of fish had built up in front of the rivers since nobody had been catching them, and more were headed around the Cape. This opener could give them the jump start they needed for a good season. As well, the other fishers were watching her and her crew, the women, and waiting for them to fail. She could not allow that to happen. She stood on the flybridge, a second-story roof above the cabin, angling the Grand O'Malley between the other boats that were circling the mouth of the salmon stream. She glanced at the bald eagles and gulls that lined the driftwood and perched on the cliffs along the shore. Sea lions broke the water surface and roared. Foxes played in the tie line and howled at the silver moon, just visible in the growing daylight. They all knew the salmon were coming. She yelled down to Sally Ann and Eve, "You know, a fishing opener is kind of like drinking. It makes people more of what they already are. If they jerks on land, they're assholes out here." Just in the shadow of a walrus skull passed over the flybridge at the Grand O'Malley. The Candy nudged up against the Grand O'Malley, and Jackie looked down from the skull that had been fastened to the pilot house to see Clem Dieter peering at it from under his rust-colored, overgrown, weedy eyebrows. His boat was 6 feet longer than hers and had a thick rubber bumper wrapped around the entire hull. This served as a signal that he wasn't afraid to ram other boats. The nudge got Sally Ann's attention. They looked to see the name Candy stretched across the bow in cloying Baroque script. The skiff man from Candy was a guy Eve had fought with in the bar. He glared over at Eve and revved his jet engine. Eve stared back, unfazed. She took off her glove one finger at a time and then flipped him off. He revved his engine harder, as if to start a drag race. She turned away from him and began bouncing on the back of her heels. "I have to pee," she told Sally Ann. "I think it's because I'm so excited." "Well, hold it," Sally Ann said. "Open her any minute." "You're not my boss," Eve said. Sally Ann didn't turn and look at her, but said, "I know that, just a suggestion." When Fish and Game called the opener of the radio, mayhem would ensue, as boats chased down the schools of salmon, fought for the area in front of the streams and off the capes. After the opener, things would settle down, and they would take turns in the hot spots, but the first opener was a free-for-all on the biggest set of the season. Around them, an occasional salmon broke the surface of the water and landed back on its side. Jackie saw the jumper, and like songbirds and house cats, she twitched with anticipation to go after them. Clem saw it too, and using his bumper, nudged the Grand O'Malley even harder. He was getting territorial, trying to take her spot. Esmeralda stood in the skiff towed behind the seiner, the outboard kicking up a frothy wash behind it. One end of the net was attached to the skiff, and the other to the main boat to set the net out. They would detach from each other, and the net would drop in the water between them. When the boats headed in opposite directions, the net would spread out. Jackie kept one eye on the other vessels to see where they moved. Most of them were bigger ships, hence longer nets, and their skiffs had jet pump outboards. But Jackie was determined not to lose her spot. If she got in too close to the cape where she wanted to be, she'd be pushed out by the opener. So she backed up to get away from Candy, yet not lose her place. She idled the boat and jogged a circle, protecting the spot she wanted. She peered through the binoculars for her brother's boat, the Predator. She didn't see him, and this worried her. Not for his sake. It's just that he knew where the fish were. Then Robert came on the radio. Brad O'Malley, come in, go to private channel. He paused, then at the new frequency said, where are you? A Ukalik, she said. Who else is there? The God Squad, Praise the Lord, and Armageddon just finished praying for fish on the beach. We got Candy up our ass with about 2 minutes left to go, and I bet Cole Dieter's dad and brother are nearby. You around here? The Dieter family coined themselves Gypsies of the Sea. Cole's brother Clem also had an almost identical boat, sans the skeletal figurehead, but with a mess of detritus on deck. Big pots for cooking crab, algae-covered buoys pulled off the beach, and what looked like engine parts and an anchor chain piled in cairns around the deck. His current wife, named Jody, had been painted with hand stenciling over Kara, his ex-wife's name, in the upper right-hand curve. The K still visible under the marine paint. Their father, Papa, also worked a 48-foot seiner, the Susie. Papa had short, thick legs and an enormous belly, in contrast to his tall, lean sons. Completely bald and with thick white hairs jutting from his ears, he maintained the appearance of perpetually astonished. All the Dieters spoke with a Texas accent, frequently saying y'all and spitting when they said, well, sheet. And no one really understood this because the Dieters had never been out of Alaska. It was presumed they used to work on the northern oil slopes with Texans. All right, so the conversation with them getting it. At 6 a.m., the season officially opened. Jackie yelled, cut her loose, and all around them, silver pancakes snapped to free the tie-up lines, releasing the skiffs from the main boats. The skiffs pulled away from the seiner, and the nets, corks, web, and lead lines spilled off the back deck. The Candy and the Jody started knocking into other boats where the Susie held back. Jackie threw the Grand O'Malley into gear and drove it into an arch-like shape, hoping to intercept fish rounding the point. From the corner of her eye, Jackie thought she saw a dark paisley shape of school of salmon diving to escape her net, and she felt her heart leap a little at the chase in anticipation of pulling up the money bag. She stayed focused on the set, tuned out the unintelligible screaming of skippers on other boats, and then Sally Ann yelled, hold on. Jackie smelled a blast of engine oil and rust and seaweed. She signaled for Esmeralda to tow towards her so they could get the set closed and catch this beautiful school of fish. Keeping the salmon in line of vision, she didn't notice that the Candy was headed straight for them, full throttle. In the final moment, Jackie turned and stared as they bared down on the Grand O'Malley in a blur of bow, weedy eyebrows, and skull. She froze and watched in disbelief as the Candy throttled up and the bow rammed straight into the side of the Grand O'Malley with a loud thunk. The Grand O'Malley bucked at the blow. Jackie held on, and the crash threw her against the railing, where she fell and for a second thought she might go overboard, and so grabbed onto the rail. She then jumped up. Her twisted ankle and bruised knee were of no concern. Her first thought was, oh no, the fish. Then in a fraction of a second later, oh fuck my boat. And she whipped her head to side, looking to see if any other blow was coming. She didn't see the Candy, and so ran to the side, dropped to her knees with a stricken expression on her face, as if it had been her body that was dealt the blow, and looked overboard to make sure the boat didn't get mortally gashed from the T-bone. She saw a small dent, but no hole. The blow had thrown Eve against the outside of the cabin, and she clung onto the gears, yelling, what the fuck, is that legal? Sally Ann had dropped to her knees and grabbed onto the net, but it was still spilling off the back deck, so she scrambled to stay ahead of the mess of black mesh. As if on a running machine, it kept pulling her backwards. Eve ran to the edge and tried to reach out to grab her hand, but Sally Ann was too far away, and her feet slipped out from under her and dangled over the water. Holy shit, hang on, Eve yelled. Sally Ann grabbed the net and climbed out as fast as she could, hand over hand, and Eve grabbed her by the rain jacket and yanked her, and they both slid back on deck. So they were fighting for a bit. Let's see. Well, I think I'm going to up there. So let's jump to. So Sally Ann and Eve pulled the net onto the hydraulic block that would help them stack it back on deck. Sally Ann worked the cork pile and swung a string of white buoys into small circles. Eve directed the lead line into a neat line on the other side of the deck. It came over the hydraulic head wet and heavy, and Eve put her hood up over her head and directed it back and forth with her shoulder. Black web spilled between them. On occasion, they hurried over and pushed it into an even pile. The net had to be stacked just so that it would spill seamlessly off the back deck on the next set. Just as they almost had it, Eve looked up and a bag of jellyfish, red and translucent, in a glob that dripped through the web's mesh, flipped through the hydraulic head and landed on her face. God damn it, she yelled, but kept guiding the lead line, sputtering and blinking. I got it, Sally Ann said. Wash it off. Eve yanked her gloves off and ran for the deck hose, muttering, I think I might have peed my pants a little. On a boat a short distance away where the skipper was yelling unintelligibly at deckhands, he yanked his baseball hat off, threw it on deck, and while stomping on it, yelled, you missed all the fish, over and over. Eve returned and helped Sally Ann finish stacking the last of the net. She noticed a glint of silver in the massive web. Ha, there's a pink on the clusterfuck, Eve announced. That is one stupid fish if it got caught in that goat rodeo, Sally Ann said. Let's cook it. So, so that is sort of bits and pieces of the first section. And this novel, a couple of years ago, I got the ending on it sort of as fast as I could and submitted it for a competition, which is the Penn Bellwether Award, which Barbara Kingsolver sponsors for novels that address issues of social justice and environmental justice. And I was one of 10 finalists, but I did not win it. So I was very bummed about that. And I sent it to my agent, and my agent said she did not like she didn't think it was, she had problems with the plot, the structure, the characters, and I think about everything else. So, so I called a writer who's also here in Marin, who wrote an amazing novel called When the Elephants Last Dance. Her name was Tessa Holt. If you haven't read it, it's beautiful. It's about the final days of the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. But she said, you know, same thing happened to me, and I hired this editor who's great and has helped me through my whole novel. And so that's, so I hired this editor, but I could only afford the first 50 pages. so I started a Kickstarter campaign.
I have the microphone here, and I should have mentioned earlier, we have the Community Media Center of Marin here tonight. They've been recording all of the programs in the series, and that's Damien on the camera there, and Bill is our producer. Actually, we also have tonight Paolo Salvagioni, who was the speaker for the second in the series. So, hello, Paolo.
And Robert, too, was a speaker in the series.
A different series, but...
Oh, there's a different series. Oh, I thought
Robert
that was
is famous for his Crow program at the library, which I think set an all-time attendance record for a library program. So what we'll do is sort of Phil Donahue style. I will pass the microphone around for people to ask questions of Maria. I'll start off with a question, though. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your experience with the TED book. And then also, second part, and I'm sure the question on the lips of everyone here is how eating whole fish can make us sexier.
Okay, yeah. So I had, I write a lot about seafood because of the connection there, and I had been down to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, has this big conference once a year about sustainable food with an emphasis on seafood, and I came back and I'd been writing some articles on various things on how to use the whole fish as a trend. And one of my neighbors on the houseboats was an editor for TED Books, and she said, you want to do a book on this? And I said, sure. So the idea behind it is sort of the salmon is such an amazing creature, where the wild salmon, about 136 species rely on it besides us, and it brings minerals from the ocean up the rivers, and all these other animals that eat it, like the eagles and the bears and the otters, that they take it and they scatter these minerals throughout the land. It fertilizes the land, creates a riparian buffer, or kind of natural buffer with roots and trees and plants, so it creates more shade and cleaner water for them to have their young in. So there are these kind of amazing parts of our ecosystem, and we've done terrible things to our river, clearly, and now they're farming salmon, which is terrible for the environment, and I think they're deciding today whether they're going to allow genetically engineered salmon on the market, and it's sounding like they're going to allow that. And so we're just moving further and further away from this sort of holistic concept of nature and how it really is perfect, and we still are, our ideas can be deeply imperfect. So the whole fish was sort of about eating, valuing the entire fish, eating the whole thing that we're not used to. So sort of a culinary trend, but also kind of looking at sort of how we eat and what we eat, especially when it comes to seafood, in a way that's good for the ocean and not bad for it. So how does it make you sexier? Well, number of ways. So A, it makes you smarter. So there's so many omega-3s, protein, mineral, and things like herring, salmon, sardines, in their eggs. And their eggs, that's the thing, the eggs, the head, the bellies, these places we normally throw away. This is where all the nutrients are and all the really good omega-3s. So it makes you smarter. It also raises your serotonin level, so you're naturally in a good mood. And then this idea of cooking differently, trying different things in the kitchen, it just enhances creativity in all parts of your life and will naturally extend to the bedroom, right? So that's also part of it. So it's yeah. so there's several reasons for that. And so we also, Sausalito had its first herring festival this year. I know John Foss was a big part of that, and David Jones was serving herring there. Did anybody else go to that? And it was amazing. And they, I just thought, oh no, there's going to be 12 people there. Oh no, who's going to? It was a huge turnout. They sold out a herring in an hour and a half, and we should be eating our herring in our bay. We should be eating our sardines. We should not be eating big tuna and big swordfish and so I think we're seeing a shift very slowly, but that's sort of what the book is about, is to encourage a different type of eating of seafood. And it's only $3. You can download it on, it's a downloadable book. It's not a print book. So all the TED books are short, they're inexpensive, and mine has about 25 recipes in it. One of them David Jones put in there for fish head soup. But it's great. Also Poggio's, there's a recipe from Poggio's, a recipe from Fish Restaurant in Sausalito, and just lots of great chefs from up and down the West Coast. So, including salmon salt, which is drawing out salmon bones, grinding them down, and mixing it in 1 part salt. And then you can sprinkle that on food so you get calcium, omega-3s, and a little bit more like umami depth with it. It's good. I'm telling you, I should have brought some. It's like fish sauce. It's kind of like a dry fish sauce. That's really what.
Wasn't there another book that you asked about?
No, it's the whole fish. That was a TED book, yeah. Yeah, there's a card with all the information on it. A slightly different title. She asked how long I was up in Alaska altogether. I was up there for 8 years. And and then I moved to New York City for graduate school. So it was a very drastic contrast. So that's why I love living here. I feel like you have the best. What I loved in New York City is in San Francisco. What I loved about Alaska is out here in West Marin, and you have none of the suffering of those two places. Paolo?
Could you read the rest of the sex scene?
Well, so this
I like what I heard.
Well, this is so Paolo.
Public access TV.
So that's what Paolo I know from the Headland Center for the Arts. He was an artist out there, and I was working on this novel out there in residency. And if you haven't been to the Headlands, you should go there. It's a magical place. They have open house about 3 times a year. They have public programming. I actually have an article coming out in Edible Marin in about a month about their kitchen there, which is my favorite place to eat in Northern California. But I had a writing group out there, and it's a group of women. And so every time I was like, I'm kind of stuck. I need something between this scene and the tsunami, or I need something between it. And they're all always like, well, what about a sex scene? I'm like, okay. So I have quite a few sex scenes in my novel. And I talk to fishermen about it. They're always like, it's not like that. And I'm like, well, if you're a woman, it could be. It's because there's a lot of guys. And on the fishing grounds, probably 500 to 1 or something. But, in Anchorage, because all these women come up, right, thinking they're going to meet a man, and they stop in Anchorage. We're like, that's not where they are. They're out on the fishing grounds or the oil fields. But we have a few sayings in Alaska. One of them is where the odds are good and the goods are odd. And our other one is you don't have to look good. Because you're out there and you're like, and you're filthy and you haven't had a shower in weeks and you're working and you're everything. And they're calling over going, you want to come over for supper? And it's just, and you feel like you're Uma Thurman, and you're like, this is awesome.
Did you dramatize the violence that you're depicting of the boats crashing into each other? Is it really like that?
Oh yeah, for the opener it is. Yes, that happened to us. That exact thing happened to us on the first opener.
Every year this goes on?
No, it's not every year and it's not all the time. Because what happens after the opener is most of the time people get in lines, but people fight. Sometimes people pull guns on each other, and
really?
It's Alaska. It's the Wild West, and nobody's in charge. Like Fish and Game, every once in a while, their only job is to protect the fish. They don't care what you do to each other, really. And then when you're on the boat, you have 4 people living on 44 feet for 3 to 4 months, right? So then they start to fight. And I know one woman, her name's Mary Jacobs, she's kind of my idol. She ran an all-female seine boat on Kodiak for years, like 20, 30 years. And we've become friends, and so she's given me some great lines for the novel, and she's given me a lot of feedback, because she'll read it, and she'll go, why isn't the skipper yelling at her here, you know, or why isn't the skipper doing this? And when Mary was working early on, she got on a boat, and she got on a boat all mad, and the skipper said to her, look, you have a choice. You can fuck everybody or nobody on this boat. That's the deal. And she said, easy, nobody. But it's just one of those, it's just a different law of the land out there. How things go. Like if you showed up for a job here down at Molly Stone's, nobody would say that to you. Yeah, you got two choices. And that's it. I don't know if this. Hopefully this will be edited out of the television program. But this is another sort of raunchy story. But I went on a float trip with a bunch of commercial fisherwomen last summer, and they had these great stories. And one woman was very hardcore, worked on crabbers on the Bering Sea. She worked with men, and long lining in the Gulf of Alaska. And she said, yeah, I was out there in the crab boats, and I'm watching the guys work on deck, and she said, and they're always saying women can't do this job. She said, but never once did I see them pull their cock out and use it on deck. So that was her, you know, so you're like, so it's like, why can't women do this job, you know? And that was her, so she was this crabber, that's what she'd go around and say. She'd be like, wait a minute, you're saying women can't do this, but I'm not seeing you guys pull your pants down out there. So that was, so these fisherwomen they're tough, you know, too. Like they're not people you'd want to bar fight with. Yeah, and I went up to write an article on mushing once, and I was living in New York, and I have a girlfriend up there who's a dog musher. So I went up to write an article, and we worked as dog handlers, and it was super fun. Like, the dogs love to run. They're howling, they're ecstatic, and so we let the dogs loose with the musher, and we went and changed clothes and went into the bar in Clam Gulch, Alaska. And we walked in the bar, and all these women sit in the bar. They looked like they'd been, like, drinking and smoking since, like, August in there. And they turned around and saw me, and I was wearing a light blue kind of sweater, and I was had visited from New York City. And they all just gave me this look, and I turned to Allison, and I said, I'm going to go put my dog handling clothes back on. And Allison's like, I got your back, but that's probably a good idea. So, so it's just, so in Alaska, the women are really tough, too. They're all tough up there. It's... So did you ever get down to South America? Oh, yeah. Yeah, because my first summer, I think my plane ticket cost $650, and I earned $800 that summer. But it was enough money to get on buses and make it to Guatemala, and I volunteered on an orphanage the first winter. Then I went back up and worked, and then I made it to Spain to teach English. I made it to Peru a couple times. I made it to Cuba. Yeah, so I was able to, I never quite earned enough to not go to a developing nation in the winter. So it was like, I kind of would take my $10,000 or whatever I earned for the summer. Sometimes it'd be $5,000, sometimes $10,000, and I'd go to another country for a lot of the winter. Because I wasn't even enough money to stay in Alaska, because you have to buy fuel and gas and all these things and there's no jobs in these small towns in the winter. Like, that's it for the year. So that's sort of that's kind of part of it.
I want to know what happened when you pull in the net for salmon. I've never been net fishing.
Oh, I wish I had gotten that. It wasn't in the video, but what happens is it's a purse seine. So it pulls up this, it's very exciting, really, and it pulls up what's called the money bag. So that's a final kind of, that's what all the skippers say. They're like, well, you want to smell like fish. That's a smell of money, that's they say that all summer, like, it smells like money, boat smells like money, but it's called the money bag. So it purses all the way up. It's called a purse seine. So as you pull in the net, as the deckhands pull in the net, the bag is getting smaller and smaller, and the skipper's kind of pulling in the purse line. So it pulls up a bag of fish, and then the boom moves it over a fish hold and lowers the fish into a fish hold. And all the fish holds now have refrigerated water systems in them. So they'll circulate through the fish, keep them fresh, and then you eventually deliver to a tender, which is a really large boat, like a crabbing boat. So they'll take on all the fish, give you some tickets, fish tickets for your catch. You cash that in with the cannery at the end of the summer. They'll give you gas. You can get your food there, take a shower on the tender. So those are the big boats you're delivering to. Oftentimes we have to jump into the hold with the fish and throw the fish into brailer bags, and then the brailer bags lift up over your heads. So you try to run away from the slime that's coming down off of it and the worms and everything else and avoid that while it's going onto the big boat. Yeah, so it's kind of smelly, and it's exhausting. So when you're doing this, it's 20 hours a day. You're lucky if you get to sleep about 3 hours a day. That's wet, and they open at different timing. Lower Cook Inlet, we fish 5 days a week, close down 2 days a week. Kodiak will oftentimes open 7 days, and they'll go for 4 months. So it's a brutal season.
How did you find time to write?
I didn't on the boats. No. Your hands are numb all the time too. No, I didn't on the boat. But I had 8 months off a year, so that was sort of the point of doing it, is to have the time off to write and travel. So. Would you do it again? God, no. No, I mean, that's the thing. If I was 21, I would do it again. Now, right. Oh, there's no way. No, but I mean, if you went back to 21, knowing what you know now, and you went back there. Yes. It completely, I mean, it's just, it's one of those things that has like shaped my entire life. I mean, the reason I live here is I have a couple different girlfriends from Alaska, Colette, Ireland, and my friend Jessie Brainerd live on boats here. So I came out to visit them, and I stayed on Colette's boat. And Jessie lives on a wooden sailboat with a surfboard strapped to the side of it, and Colette has this big sort of floating RV. And they're kind of these feral Alaskan women. And I was just like, oh, this is where I want to live. I knew it immediately. I was like, went back to New York, packed my stuff up. And there's something about it, I think, Port Town and all of that, and also West Coast. But I totally do it again. It was a great adventure. What's next? Writing-wise? Or adventure-wise? Well, you know, it's funny, because now it's like, oh, adventure-wise. I just learned to scuba dive. I am hopefully going to Costa Rica to do an article on hammerhead sharks and shark finning. So I got my scuba diving license for that. And I just turned in a book proposal based on the TED book and the herring article. Island Press contacted me to write a book about seafood. And this one, the working title is called Eat Like an Animal, about diversifying our seafood choices and trying to create an ecosystem-based way of eating instead of a single species sort of focus. So so there'll be a lot of traveling with that too. I'm hoping, I might go out on a fishing boat this summer. My friend Dan McLean called me, he's a big fisherman in Prince William Sound, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm stretching the boat now, I'm stretching it, it's gonna be huge. So I have no idea what that means. But I figure if I'm out there, he's a great fisherman, I won't have to fix anything, I don't have to do anything if I don't want to. I just have to cook and not be temperamental, that's what he said. So you just can't be temperamental.
And I also just wanted to wish her best of luck with her novel,
Sea
Legs and Fishnet. So we'll
Thank
all be
you very
looking out for
much.
it. Thank you.